Good morning. Thank you, Chris. Thanks so much. Listen, a very, very warm welcome to you all. So yes, I'm Natasha. I head up sales here for uk.mer in the UK. Just a little bit about kind of who we are, because I'm aware that some of you might not be familiar with us. So we are an EV charging company. Okay, so we are Europe-wide company. Our parent company, we're owned by a company called Statkraft. Okay, so Statkraft is Europe's largest producer of renewable energy. And what we do here within MER is we offer full turnkey end-to-end solutions around EV charging solutions. So why did we feel the need to do this today? I think, webinars, I think, are becoming part of the future. And I think it was a really good platform for us to share some of our experiences, but more importantly, invite one of our strategic partners into the mix. So you could get a feel for some real life experience about the journey that these guys have embarked upon. We do a lot of campaign specific work here within MER, and the current campaign, which feels very aligned to what's happening in the industry right now, is within the blue light sector. So I think we recognise that transitioning across to an alternative fueling method, whether it's electric or potentially hydrogen, I know there's lots of conversations about that at the moment, is relevant to all businesses, right? So all organisations are going to have this challenge, I would say, an opportunity to create something here, and it's relevant across all fleets, I think. And for us, the transition into that alternative fueling is only going to gain momentum. We know that the Prime Minister has announced this week that it's been delayed by another 5 years in terms of banning the petrol, the ICE variants. But I don't believe that that's going to slow things down. I think what it does do, though, is it allows people to maybe take a step back at this point in time and just consider their approach to this, okay? What we experience is not one organisation can do this alone. I think building key strategic partners and collaborating with those that potentially have some strengths in certain areas is maybe the way forward. And just from a perspective of around why do we think we're a credible voice in this? MER, we've been operating within the sector here in the UK from 2014. We have a huge experience in fleet electrification, and that's how our business is aligned. We've got a really powerful partner online today. So Martin Gibson, who is the Environmental and Sustainability Manager for North East Ambulance Service. He's been living and breathing this since 2022, but I'm sure their organisation has had consideration well before then. And as Chris has mentioned, we're going to share some experiences. I think there's nothing better than listening to it from somebody that's actually taken that journey and been through that process. So just a little bit, I think, from my perspective around what I believe some of the challenges and opportunities are within your specific sector. I think there's a lot of hot topics right now. I think there's emerging technology coming into the market that people need to be aware of and build their knowledge around. I feel that government legislation and policy is leading the way. You'll get a lot of directive, I think, from outside of your particular business units, where maybe sustainability strategies and net zero strategies are guiding and kind of leading the way around what you guys need to do. And reducing gas emissions is obviously the natural thing that we're interested in, and I think that's a major focus. So importantly, I think the assets, the first thing that people are going to look at in terms of what do we do with the vehicles themselves? How do we transition that over? And that's a huge task in itself, right? I think side by side to that, and probably more importantly, in our opinion, is how are you going to charge these vehicles across your entire estate? There are some real challenges. I think let's not beat around the bush and be afraid to identify that we think there are some challenges. Operationally, the blue light sector is probably, when we say vehicles are mission critical, they really are in your sector. So there's probably some low-hanging fruit that you could look at in terms of electrifying. You've got staff, you've got the workplace, you've got visitors that come to your locations. But then when you start to look at your rapid response units, that's probably not going to be such a straightforward concept for you to electrify those vehicles, or at least look at alternative fueling methods. I think cost is going to be a major implication. You guys have never approached a project of this nature before. What do you benchmark it against? How do you know if what you're looking at is the right solution? How do you know if the costs are fair and reasonable? And do you understand really the time and the resource that you need to invest into a project of this magnitude? So I think for us, we recognise, for you guys especially, failing in this space could be catastrophic for you. And I think making decisions that are a little bit too quick, or you're uninformed, could be quite dangerous for any organisation, but probably more relevant to you guys. So In terms of priorities, I think there's a few key things that should hopefully come out as we go through the webinar today. I think power is going to be a major consideration for you guys. You know, electrifying the fleets and the magnitude of what you guys have to do, it's big. You know, you're going to be needing power. You know, these buildings that you operate from were never intended or designed to have power going out into the depots around the back or into the car parks. And the likelihood is you're going to have restrictions on whether you can shut down certain locations for us to even connect into your local power board. So I think having an understanding of your entire estate is probably a priority that you'd need to take. You know, what's possible across all of your locations right now? Which vehicles are the ones that are going to need electrifying first, and kind of go into this with a full idea of the whole kind of estate and what challenges you potentially could be faced with. And then I think it's about building a clear picture, plan and assess. And, you know, there's some really fundamental things you can start doing right now. I think engaging with some strategic partners that can help you and guide you through this process is going to be really important. And I know Martin's going to touch on a few of those things for us. Collaboration, I think there are some experts in this field. You know, here at MER, that's what we do. You know, that's within our DNA. We help and support and guide customers through this process. I think real experience is invaluable. So for me, this is a perfect introduction now to our guest speaker, Mr. Martin Gibson. It's a pleasure that we have you with us today. I'm going to now hand over to two of the guys that work alongside me, so Lindsay Hetherington and Scott, and we're going to just start on this journey and hopefully talk you through a real life case of what these guys got up to, how they approach this. And then, of course, we would welcome your questions at the end, and I'd be really delighted to get involved with that kind of scenario at the back end. So over to you guys, and thanks again for your time.
Thanks, Natasha. Yes, so I'm Lindsay. Like I said, we'd just like to introduce Martin from the North East Ambulance Service. Our journey with the North East Ambulance Service started in around 2015. We actually installed the first Alphen smart charging station at their HQ in Benicia House. So that was a real milestone for us. And then we went on to install a further 9 locations. They were initially 7 kilowatt dual charging stations to support 5 Nissan Leaf pool cars way back then, and now we're looking at phase 2. So we'll discuss with Martin. So Martin, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself, your role within the service, and your responsibilities in terms of transitioning to EV?
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Lindsay, and morning, everyone. So yeah, a little bit, I guess, about my role. So as Natasha mentioned, I'm the Environmental and Sustainability Manager at North East Ambulance Service. I started working at the Trust back in February 2022. So I've now been in the role for just over 18 months, having previously worked in a number of different environmental roles across a range of industries. So my current role is primarily to ensure, first of all, that the Trust maintains environmental compliance and also works towards our national targets, including the overarching NHS commitment of reaching net zero for carbon emissions by 2040. So as we're an emergency service that covers the whole of the North East region, we do have a pretty big fleet. With varying different types of vehicles with different uses. And vehicles are actually our most significant emitter of carbon, with about 90% of our total carbon footprint coming from transport. Therefore, a big part of our net zero strategy over the coming years is actually finding solutions and implementing projects to reduce our emissions from fleet transport. So my role sits within the estates team, so I can influence and input into the development of EV infrastructure. We do also have a fleet manager and a fleet team who are responsible for the purchase of vehicles, which actually falls outside my remit. However, my job is also to provide environmental advice and to be able to assist with how and what type of vehicles we could and should be purchased. So that's kind of my role and where my responsibilities fit within the organisation in terms of transitioning EV.
Thanks for that, Martin. Just a sort of additional question before we kind of move on. You mentioned kind of fleet managers there. Can you maybe explain just a little bit more about how, you know, you're working with the likes of your fleet managers, maybe health and safety around a project of this nature?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, as I say, you know, we work with the fleet manager, but my role primarily sits within the estate. So, you know, my job is to kind of map out and plan a strategy for implementation of our EV network. I do have to work closely, obviously, with the health and safety team as well, who sort of attend when we get contractors on to carry out site visits to make sure that everything ticks the boxes in that respect.
Yeah.
So we do have to work closely with, obviously, as I say, the health and safety team, the fleet manager, the fleet
facilities
team. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's important that we all kind of work together in implementing this strategy.
Yeah, I mean, it's been my experience working with other emergency services where it's very much a collaborative effort, bringing all the various departments in together, working together, probably for the first time, really, in many respects. So yeah, it's a really critical part of the project. I appreciate. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the drivers have been for around your net zero strategy and obviously the transition to EV, Martin?
Yeah, absolutely. So at a national level, the NHS has committed to net zero by 2040 and has a vision of becoming the world's first net zero health service. As an individual trust, the North East Ambulance Service obviously shares this net zero by 2040 commitment, and we've set this as a key target in our sort of strategic green plan and sustainability action plan. In terms of the transition to EV, as I mentioned previously, we do have quite a large fleet of around 600 vehicles, which contribute 90% of our total greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, decarbonisation of the fleet and obviously transition to EV is probably the most important part of our net zero journey, as it's such a significant contributor towards our carbon emissions. So that's kind of the main driver, really, is that 2040 target and the fact that we have such a large contributor towards our emissions from the fleet.
Yeah. And maybe something, Lindsay, you can support on as well with Martin is, you know, what's been done so far in terms of that strategy and where do you see yourselves in 12 to 18 months' time?
Absolutely, yes. So I can start off by giving you a quick kind of overview of what we've done to date and kind of where we plan on going.
Yeah.
So we do have a fairly large estate, and we operate out of around about 60 buildings, of which most of those, I think 57 of the 60, we have fleet vehicles that are based there. So today we have made some small progress in terms of transitioning to EVs. We've got a couple of EV pool cars, and we've installed some 7 kilowatt chargers at about 10 of our sites. We are expecting to increase our EV fleet over the next sort of 12 to 18 months, and in the medium to longer term. In the medium term, we do expect that vehicles that reach sort of end of life will then be replaced with EVs. So we will start to see an increase in the number of EV vehicles in our fleet. With this in mind, we are in the process of expanding our charging infrastructure. So we've carried out some electrical capacity load testing at all of our stations to help us get a better understanding and get an idea of how much and where we can actually install additional charging and where we might need to look to potentially increase capacity at our sites to meet future demand. So we've also, with the help of MER, made some initial contact with the DNO, Northern Power, in our area, to assess the feasibility of capacity upgrades at our major sites and to get an understanding of what the costs of this might be. So we've made some progress, and we plan to roll out whilst also looking at the sort of longer term vision with the DNO applications for our larger sites. So yeah, that's kind of where we stand at the moment.
I think you've really made some good progress, and I always kind of recommend that you look at it as a phased approach, and you've certainly done that. So I suppose phase 1 was back in 2015, installing the 7 kilowatt charging stations, which were not uncommon to install back then. But now looking at that future proof option and the kind of upgrades of the vehicles, we're looking at the 22 kilowatt double socket charger, and even then looking at some key locations to put the 50 kilowatt, even 120 kilowatt DC rapid charging stations in there. But yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely looking at that phased approach is, I think, a really good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also important to kind of, identify the operating profile of the vehicles that you have, and understand what type of chargers that you might need to suit the needs of the fleet of vehicles that you have. So yeah,
absolutely. So we've obviously done we do feasibility studies and on-site surveys with you, and yeah, we put the charging infrastructure in, get it all in place, but obviously within this emergency services environment, it's crucial to kind of that downtime of the vehicles is kept at a minimum. How do you think it's really important for the service to have that management system, that network all in one place of infrastructure, and then obviously a really kind of localized support and maintenance team, so that SLA going forward to keep those their vehicles going, really?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be very important for us. So as I've said, currently we don't have a huge number of electric vehicles. So to date, managing charging hasn't been a huge issue. However, we do, as we begin to roll out additional EVs, we do recognise that it's going to be very important being able to manage the infrastructure, so that we can have a clear idea of charger availability at each site, for example. We'll also be able to identify which chargers are offline and if we have any maintenance that's required. We'll also be able to monitor usage at each site to develop a better understanding of where and when vehicles are being charged, and if there's sufficient charging infrastructure in place at a particular site, or do we need to add some more in order to meet future demand. So for us, I think it is critically important, really, that we have a network of charging infrastructure that is consistent and can be monitored and utilised under one system to prevent the need for multiple service contracts, multiple charging fobs, etc., from different suppliers. So I think it'll also be beneficial from a servicing point of view. So knowing that the infrastructure will be regularly serviced and ensure that we meet all of the regulatory requirements. And if there's any issues, we have a single point of contact, and we know that we can get an issue fixed pretty much immediately. So yeah, I mean, having a single charge point kind of management system, I think, is going to be essential for us, and is a key requirement when kind of deciding on how we should roll out our charging network.
Yeah, it's like the justification, the need for more at certain locations when you can monitor the usage, and also really good for marketing teams to look at your CO2 savings, that kind of thing. And I think we always say kind of, if you can have as much or little involvement as you want in the back office once the infrastructure is in place, because basically our teams can manage it all for you. But yeah, some people kind of just want to leave it to ourselves. The 24-hour support lines there for use for members of the public or the fleet drivers to use. So if you put that kind of support tool in place, it frees you up a little bit to look at higher projects rather than the day-to-day running of the infrastructure.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, we will still come across challenges, especially in this space. What would you say the biggest challenges you've faced so far, or you expect to face in the future, kind of starting this year with your second rollout?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd probably say overall the biggest challenge would be costs. So, we've now got a better understanding of what we need to do, but I guess the challenge now becomes how do we fund it? So we do have some capital available for smaller projects, putting in EV chargers at sites, but obviously bigger projects such as the electrical infrastructure upgrades can be very expensive, and the costs are quite difficult to justify.
Yeah, absolutely.
Other key challenges I would say are, or the main kind of questions that we kind of have to ask ourselves is, do we have the available capacity to install the infrastructure that we want or need? If not, what are the costs and the time scale for making those upgrades through the DNO? Understanding what type of chargers you need is also a challenge. Obviously, this is a new transport system for everyone, which I'd imagine most or not many organisations have experience of. So we have had to make a fair few assumptions around how the fleet will operate in terms of downtime for charging and vehicle mileage per day and per journey. Obviously, with petrol and diesel vehicles, you can obviously run your fuel tank down, and it takes maybe 5 or 10 minutes to fill up. With an EV, there needs to be more kind of thought around the logistics about when vehicles can be charged up, especially as currently battery ranges are a bit lower than what you get out of a fuel tank at present. So yeah, in terms of charger locations, I think the things to consider are groundworks, or any groundworks required, electrical upgrades. Does your site have capacity to put in the chargers that you need? Then there's the question of kind of what comes first, really, the fleet or the infrastructure. So we're in the position where we are starting to install quite a lot of infrastructure, but we don't really have a huge electric fleet. So probably many of the chargers that we put in are infrequently used. However, our fleet department are quite reticent, I think, to make large orders of EV vehicles without knowing kind of how or where they will be charged up. So it is a little bit of a chicken and egg in terms of where do you start. It's not necessarily as simple as just going out and purchasing electric vehicles without first thinking about how you can actually keep them running with that network of infrastructure. So
yeah. Absolutely. And I think it's a little bit of a mindset challenge as well with the drivers who will be going in EVs. It's a whole new way of driving and kind of planning their day, planning their routes out, isn't it? So that's probably another challenge to look at.
Definitely.
I think with some of the challenges we faced, especially with kind of key locations that may be kind of critical call centres, that kind of thing, putting DC rapid charging equipment in there where we can't shut the power boards down, then we're having to bring in new DNOs, that kind of thing. I think that's a huge kind of challenge in itself. And I think initially to know that from the outset before you rush in and do any kind of orders or anything like that, to know that from the outset with our kind of to get full visibility of the site. So that's probably where we'd start to get the full on-site survey done and then work on the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
And resolve it there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more, actually. Time and time again, Lindsay, I'm sure you've had it as well, where in this circumstance, maybe the fleet manager's gone and ordered a lot of EVs. Yeah. Then the facilities manager's reacting to get the infrastructure in play. It definitely sounds like you're doing the right thing, Martin, about getting the infrastructure in place first before making those major investments in your EV fleet.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've given some great insights so far, Martin. Just really to kind of conclude this part of the webinar before we lead on to Q&A, just really keen to understand if you had any sort of top tips or, key bits of advice that you would give to the group listening.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say that the main kind of key bit of advice would be to start planning early. Try and understand your your fleet requirements and your current position regarding available electrical capacity and availability at your sites, to help you understand sort of how much and where you may be able to implement the infrastructure. If you do need to engage with the DNO, do it early, as there could be potentially, a long wait. And also, I think engaging with credible installers who actually have experience of EV charging, of installing the EV charging infrastructure. Get advice. It's new to certainly most of us. So working with credible installers and learning and leaning on their experience, I think is definitely advisable.
Have you had the opportunity, Martin, to maybe engage with other peers, maybe other ambulance services or other emergency services, or is it very much something you've kind of looked at yourselves, really?
Yeah, so we do have sort of regular national ambulance transport meetings. We also have regional with other trusts within our region, not necessarily ambulance services.
Mm-hmm.
So we do get a bit of a picture of kind of where the other trusts and where other services are at. And I think we're all going in the same direction. There's been quite a lot of work done in terms of rolling out that infrastructure. I think moving forward also, there will be a need to work together and develop a kind of, I guess, a national ambulance network or national or a regional trust service network of EV charging, because we're all kind of providing the same service, so it makes sense to work together in that regard.
Mm-hmm. And do you see an opportunity working with other emergency services, not just ambulance?
Absolutely. I mean, there are a number of our sites are shared sites with other emergency services. So we do share sites with the fire service, and I think we do share a few sites with police as well. So there's certainly the opportunity there to work together in terms of developing a network of infrastructure.
Yeah, shared resource. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think as well that kind of comes back to kind of doing your research, doing everything before you commit to a strategy. So looking at that OCPP compliant piece, the open charge point protocol. So in future, you might want to combine networks, make sure you're putting the right kit in. You're not kind of coming to 5 years down the line having to pull all of the hardware out just to change the software to keep all of the network uniform, and so it's kind of running on one network basically, and that gives you an opportunity to link up with the police, the fire, and different NHS trusts too, doesn't it?
Definitely, yeah, absolutely makes sense to do that.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that's great, Martin. I think you've gave us some really good insight. Hopefully we'll get some questions from the audience.
No problem.
You?
Yes, so we have actually had a few questions come through actually, and a couple of them are for you, Martin, as well, straight off. So, so we've had one that's come in saying, asking which EV manufacturers you're working with at present.
So, as I said, we don't have a huge fleet at the moment. We've literally just swapped out some of our pool cars, and we've now brought in some Skoda Enyaqs. So so we've brought in a couple of Skoda Enyaqs. They actually have quite a decent range on them. Looking at sort of 250, 275 miles. So that's kind of our experience today. Obviously, we will moving forward be looking to expand that our EV fleet, and our fleet manager will obviously be working with manufacturers to get the best kind of deals that he can, and the best vehicles that suit our needs.
Yeah, so the Skoda Enyaq seems to be quite a popular choice, especially around the rapid response cars. At the emergency services show last week in Birmingham, there were quite a few kind of fully kitted out, and they looked spectacular. And from what I know of the Skodas, they drive beautifully as well. So that might be a top choice for anybody out there for looking at them.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I need to point out, for legal purposes, this isn't sponsored by Skoda. I just know obviously it's a very nice car. Another one for you, Martin. What's your experience been like working with the DNOs? As they're regionalised, how do you know who to contact and where do you have to start?
Yes, so to be honest, I mean, I haven't had a great deal of involvement with the DNO to date. I think one of the benefits actually of working with yourselves is that you have dealt with many of the connection and capacity sort of queries that we've had directly with the DNO. So we haven't had to deal with them too much. I have recently had to contact the DNO, so it's Northern Power, regarding some fuse upgrades at our sites, and they've been fairly responsive. They sent me the relevant application forms to fill in. What I would say is that for connection applications, the time taken to actually get the work done from kind of, once you've submitted the application and made payment can range from, I don't know, kind of 6 weeks to 6 months or even beyond that. So it's certainly worth getting your applications in early if you do need to make kind of changes to your electrical systems, because it can be quite a lengthy process.
I think it can be a bit of a minefield as well if you're not kind of electrically minded, that kind of thing. So I think the beauty for us, that not necessarily myself, but our design teams and our electrical engineers can kind of engage. They've got that relationship with different DNOs, so Northern Power Grid in this instance, and they can do our applications, designs, and put all of the specification in from our survey, which I think, yeah, it's a little bit easier, isn't it, to do it that way, and I think causes a lot less stress and confusion, really, if that leave it to the experts as such.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm not an electrical engineer or an electrical expert by any means. So going back to kind of the key advice that I gave earlier, I think it's lean on kind of the experts where you can, really, and seek advice.
Another one that's come through, I think it's a thought, but it might be good to get your views on it, Martin. So somebody's asked a question about kind of EV ambulances, and has stated that it's crucial that the NHS can work together with manufacturers to decarbonise as well as the charger provider. Is this anything that's been discussed at your level, talking about what you would need to do with certain manufacturers to make sure that the vehicles were ready?
It's not really something I'm involved with, to be honest. It's probably more one for the fleet managers. I mean, absolutely, the electric ambulances is probably the sort of biggest challenge really for us. I think in terms of other support vehicles, transition to EV is very much achievable and feasible. With the ambulances, obviously, because they operate 24/7. Because of the fact that they carry such a heavy load and challenges at the moment with maybe lack of battery range, and sort of downtime for actually opportunities to charge the vehicles. It definitely is, I would say, from our point of view, the biggest challenge moving forward is, can we get an ambulance specification that kind of suits our needs, really. But yeah, sorry, I can't really add any more.
No, that's fine. Like I say, it's just a question that's come in, so I just wanted to get your thoughts on it.
I think it's really difficult, that one, because I think once you get the vehicle, it's then looking at charging infrastructure in a new kind of way. So kind of placing rapid charging equipment in not just ambulance stations, but key locations throughout the region, so your kind of A&E departments, that kind of thing. And it's that collaboration piece with the NHS trusts as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So Martin, another question for you. Sorry, they're all coming in for you at the moment. You must have hit a note with people watching us today. So another question is, have you considered the use of public charging, or are you purely relying on charging on your own estates?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly important to consider the location of public charging. So I guess as part of our planning phase, what we've done is we've identified sort of which vehicles operate out of each site, how many vehicles we have operating out of each site and what the function of the vehicle is. We've then tried to figure out kind of what extent of charging infrastructure we'll need. But then as part of that, we've looked at, we kind of mapped out the locations of the nearest charging points, the nearest public charging points to those stations. So I think it certainly will form part of our kind of charging network, is that kind of reliance on public infrastructure. But certainly for our response vehicles, I think it's very important that we do have access to our own charging as well, to ensure that, you know, the vehicles can function and operate to their maximum, really.
Another one for that, I think the last one we've got in for yourself, Martin, is are you worried about the future availability of ICE vehicles if the transition goes too slowly? It's another one that it's quite difficult, because obviously we're kind of focusing on the vehicle aspect of things.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it is a difficult one. I think there is a sense of urgency really in terms of kind of making sure that we have mapped out a strategy for how we're going to manage this transition. And obviously there's a little bit of uncertainty now in terms of that kind of the ban on petrol and diesel vehicles that was announced last week, with the date being pushed back 5 years. I think it's important that, you know, that doesn't kind of make us complacent, and we ensure that we are ready for the transition. And I think, as I mentioned before, you know, it is a little bit a bit of a chicken and egg situation, but we've adopted the approach that we need to make sure that we've got the infrastructure in place to make sure that we're ready, so that we can swap out our ICE vehicles for EVs as and when those vehicles reach end of life, and when the kind of relevant, or a suitable vehicle comes on the market that we can take advantage of.
Okay. A follow-up question's just come in for the Skoda Enyaqs, asking what your experience have been with them in terms of kind of variation in range with different drivers and during cold weather, etc.
So we've only had them a week, unfortunately, so I can't really give you much insight. So yeah, you know, our anticipation is that we'll get a significantly larger range than we've had on previous vehicles. But yeah, they haven't had a great deal of use to date because we've only had them a week.
I think they'll definitely be well tested in the northeast, Martin. We get a good cold spell up here, don't we? So that'll be interesting.
Yeah, that's it. Moving into winter, you know, they're going to get tested to the max. So well,
good.
We've got one more question that's just come in, Martin. Sorry for you. Asking if you're going to be introducing your own energy storage, so energy hubs to improve with the kind of the capacity scenario.
Not something that we've considered to date. It may be something that we can look at, but no, it's not something that we've considered as part of our strategy to date.
Okay, brilliant. Right, so I think we've got a few in for Lindsay and Scott as well. So one question, perhaps Scott, you could take this one. So after the survey, once we commit, what type of lead time can we expect for an install at one site? Just in a general kind of idea.
Yeah. We are fortunate as an organisation. We are a large EV charging business, and that does allow us to stock EV charging equipment, which obviously many of our competitors can't do. So if it's an AC requirement, certainly we do carry a lot of stock in that case, and we can install certainly within a 4 to 8 week period, depending on the particular install. If, as is increasingly going to be the case with emergency services, where we're looking at DC rapid charging, there is more of a lead time around that, because that is very much ordering from the manufacturer. Mm-hmm. And that can be several months, really, to be honest. That could be as long as sort of 6 months. But again, factor into that DNO as well. That can be a long drawn out process. So it's how long's a piece of string to a certain degree. If it's an AC requirement, yes, we can respond very quickly, because more than likely the power is going to be available on site because they require less power. We have the stocks, and of course we have the resource to install. If it's a DNO application, we're very much in the hands of the DNO themselves in terms of the power piece, and obviously ordering the large DC rapid chargers can take several months. So I'm not sure I'll give you a perfect answer there, Chris, but
no,
that really is variable.
It's like you say, there are so many different variables within the process. So yeah, I do get that. While we're talking about electrical site surveys, what typically do these include? So what should be covered? What do we look for? You know, just so people kind of know what to wait for, really.
Yeah, I'll jump on that one as well. Well, as a matter of course, with MER, we do offer, in most cases, free of charge site surveys. And that's really engaging an engineer early in the process to really get that sort of technical expertise, technical knowledge. And essentially, we're looking for, mindful of the operational requirements of the organization. We're looking for the best solution for them, the right chargers in the right place, delivering the right amount of power. They're then going to look at, the availability of power. Is there enough there to get what the business needs, or are we having to go down a DNO application piece? It's important to note that no two installs are the same. There's so many variables associated with an install. You need to engage an organization, such as ourselves, who get engineers in place who will do that site survey. Because without that, you really have nothing. You don't know what's possible. You've got no real indication of what the budgetary, the financial requirements are, whether you need additional power, and then the cost constraints associated with additional power. So engaging with an organization who will provide that service, and hopefully free of charge, is really invaluable in terms of your project planning.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned funding there. I know, Lindsay, this is something you've looked at as well. So once somebody is in the process of looking at electrifying their fleet and they're looking at the options that they have, what kind of funding is available for around that for that structure?
Yeah, so the OZEV Workplace Charging Grant is still available. So that's for workplaces and also kind of public sector too. So that gives you £350 discount per socket on the AC charging, and you can claim up to 40 sockets. We always recommend to look at that. It's a really simple process. Basically, it's an online application. You pop in your postcode, how many sockets you want to claim. You can do it again and again until those sockets are all used up. And then basically we take the voucher code and we just discount it from our quote or our invoice going forward. So we claim it back. There's kind of no lengthy paperwork or anything like that. So definitely one piece of advice is to look at that funding. You could save thousands, about £12,000 overall on your infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so another question we've just had come in, and I think it's talking about kind of being able to future-proof the site is, so when planning site upgrades, do you take into account what the site will look like in 10 years' time, perhaps? How do we avoid having to dig up all of the infrastructure that we've put on in 5 years' time when the rest of the fleet electrifies, or they move buildings to kind of air source heat pumps, that kind of thing? Yeah. So in terms of future-proofing, Scott, Lindsay, how do we address that when we're looking at things? That
really is at the forefront of our mind. Where there's a number of things we can do in terms of bringing in load balancing technologies to allow for kind of future requirements, because there may come a point where that, again, the constraints of the power means you have a choice of upgrading, or we can do things from a load balancing perspective. It's around, depending on the location of the chargers on site, can we bring some of the infrastructure across to that location? Whether it be feeder pillar cabinets, whether it be inspection chambers to pull future cables, additional groundworks. So all of this may cost more in the first instance, in phase one, if you like, but it's very much going to be a much more cost-effective solution for you longer term, because the alternative to that is going back to the power source and bringing and starting an install all over again. So yeah, it's one of the key parts of mine and Lindsay's role as associate consultants is to understand what that feature is, to then inform what the solution will be from the site survey.
Yeah, I think it's really important as well to look at your hardware that you're putting in, going back to that OCPP compliant piece, so the Open Charge Point Protocol. I've seen so many kind of public sector organisations in the past put in charging stations. You might see them on the streets. They're not working. They're taped up, but it's because the network isn't there anymore. And what we find is we're having to swap out old charging infrastructure that you can't change the SIM card, the network inside. So putting that hardware in that in 5 years' time you might want to change your network. You're just changing a SIM card. You're not actually pulling all of the infrastructure up and reinstalling again. It's that justification of the spend, really.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Somebody's just asked, Lindsay, if you could just mention the name of the funding scheme available again as well.
Yeah, it's the OZEV Workplace Charge Point Funding Scheme. You can send some links out if need be.
Thank you very much. So, and the questions just come in as a kind of a follow-up to the future proofing of sites, etc. Kind of asking about the difficulty due to many of the sites being leased. So restricting or in some cases increasing the costs at the site as they become more desirable. Is that something either of you have encountered so far?
Personally, no. Beyond the fact that obviously you're going to need landlord permission to have other works to be performed, which typically hasn't been an issue for us. I don't know if Lindsay, if you have any sort of relevant experience there.
Not as such. So working with kind of police forces, and they've got PFI sites that obviously that all needs permission and that kind of thing. But generally, I think when we look at the phased approach of looking at key sites, we're looking at the longer term. So have they got the lease longer, that kind of thing, before putting infrastructure in. Especially as well with new sites, new buildings, we're looking at putting infrastructure in, putting the cables, the ducts in at that early stage, at that planning stage even.
Right, okay. So I don't think one thing that we've gone into kind of too much detail on so far is obviously once the charge posts have gone into the ground and everything is up and running, obviously there's the back office software to consider as well. And one of the questions that's come in is how often should they be serviced and kind of what's the process behind it?
Yeah, so we service the electric vehicle charging infrastructure biannually. So every 6 months they get an on-site service, and then we'll issue electrical certificates, and we can service leads that are on site, that kind of thing. I think that's really important. I think, yeah, you might find like EV hardwares does the same job theoretically, but it's that back office support, that network, that maintenance, that is the really most important thing. If you've got a localized team of engineers that you can call on a kind of Sunday on a 24-hour call out and they'll come out, I think that's kind of what you need to look at going forward. So in terms of the network as well, we have full visibility of all infrastructure that we've installed, and probably 9 times out of 10 we will see if the chargers are down before your drivers get there, before your fleet drivers actually go to plug in. So we can look at remote resets, unplugging leads. There's a full kind of functioning back office that helps with that as well, so it's that added support. Again, if you manage your infrastructure, you'll get full visibility of that kind of back office network, and view kind of the downtime of the chargers.
Just a point to add to that slightly is within the MER Connect charge point management system, our own system, it does also have self-healing functionalities. So the ability for the back office is spotting issues and trying to heal the issues without any sort of human intervention. So that's a really good from a sort of maintenance point of view, is that the back office is essentially trying to do the fixes for us.
Yeah. It's a bit like an iPhone. I always kind of describe it. It has software updates. It has like a 30-second heartbeat all of the time. So we're constantly being fed updates and reducing that downtime.
Excellent, brilliant. So yeah, has anybody got any more questions that they'd like to pop into the chat, or if you'd like to come on screen and ask them, that's okay too. Because I think we're getting towards the end of them now. Another one that's just come in from Martin, sorry. Martin, as you say, that the project can be expensive. How does the process within the trust work? Is it fair to say that the costs are unknown and you've been on a learning experience with this as you've navigated your way through?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah. I mean, in terms of the process, I would say probably it has actually been made fairly straightforward with kind of your assistance, really. So in terms of the process, I guess, first of all, we sort of identify the sites where we're looking to install the charging infrastructure and decide how many and what chargers we want to put in. The next step from then has been to get in touch with yourselves to arrange a site survey and work with the surveyors to decide where would be the best and most cost-effective locations for the chargers, based on, you know, things like the position of the electrical distribution boards, amount of groundwork required, etc., etc. So then after that, we'd wait for the quote to come through, which can obviously vary, I think, as Scott mentioned before, depending on those factors. So when we first started out, we didn't have much of an idea of how much things were going to cost. So it's certainly been helpful, sort of leaning on your experience in that respect. But we have been able to deliver projects within budget, and, you know, working closely with yourselves has certainly sort of assisted in that.
Brilliant. I think as well, I think once we do the survey and we can issue a quote, we can use tools such as kind of estimators on if a new supply is needed from the DNO, we can kind of give estimations of how much that's going to cost before we put applications in. So we can look at kind of look at feasible sites really before anybody commits to anything.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great way to kind of
to
round it off. Yeah. I think, you know, we've covered quite a bit there, and I think what we've done is we've covered the entire spectrum, from the initial site survey right through to kind of delivery and then maintenance beyond that. We haven't had any more questions come in. I mean, obviously, if anything burning comes to mind after the webinar, you are more than welcome to get in touch with us at MER, and we'll kind of answer the question for you and kind of lead you down the route that you may need to consider. But what I'd like to do now is I'd like to hand back to Natasha, please, to kind of round off this session for today, and just some closing thoughts, Natasha.
Thanks, Chris. Wow, listen, some really thought-provoking stuff and some really interesting insight, not just from us here at MER, but having Martin on, and then the kind of questions that are coming through. It's really nice to see that level of engagement and that level of interest in what we're all doing right now. I think, look, we realise that things are going to change, and we all need to be adaptable in this process. We need to remain flexible and agile. You know, your original plan that you may come up with right now might not be what it looks like and how it transpires in the months and years to come. So collaboration is really important. And I probably can't stress enough that this aftercare bit, you know, you guys in this industry should dictate what that should look like. You know, the having a charger on your site, you know, it's critical to the operation of your business. And as your fleets grow and develop, and the more pressure gets put on this equipment to be reliable and remain consistent, you need something in place that you can rely on from an O&M, an SLA point of view. And it's critical in fleet. It's totally different to public charging. And you hear all the horror stories, don't you, when you go into a public service station or somewhere that's not so well maintained. And it can be actually catastrophic for an organisation if we don't get that right together. So, as Chris has mentioned, you know, I think it's been an excellent session. You know, I've sat back and listened, and, you know, Lindsay and Scott have got a great amount of experience in this industry. They've been here a long time, and they're really, really good in this space. So, any advice? We have a full team across the nation. You know, we're a national business. We've got European connections too. So if there's any conversations that you'd be interested in having, we are all ears. You know, we're here to help you through this, guide you through some of the processes, and even if it's just to have a bit of a chat on, you know, understanding where to go and what advice you need. I think knowledge is power, and that's what we're here for. And we're here. You know, give us a call. All of our information will be kind of provided, I think, after the chat. chat, you'll get some follow-up stuff too. So from me, a massive heartfelt thank you for taking the time out to listen. And we look forward to hopefully engaging with some of you over the coming weeks and months.
Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there we are. That's the end of our Electrifying the Emergency Services webinar for today. So again, I'd like to echo Natasha and just say thank you all so much for taking time out of your schedule to join us today. And a special thanks to Martin as well for coming on and giving us your insights and your knowledge with what you've encountered and how we've supported you through that process. So we will be reaching out in the coming weeks. And obviously, like I said before, if there are any questions that you've got in your mind, please do feel free to get in touch. So again, thank you very much. And we'll speak to you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.